I'm Jenna Kulwicki, and I'm here today with Linda Gerloff, which is my grandmother, and we are doing the interview at 1913 Road F in Guide Rock, Nebraska, and it is November 29th, 2016. So, where were you born?
I was born in Red Cloud, Nebraska. My parents lived in Guide Rock at the time.
Okay. And what day and year?
September 14th, 1947.
Okay. And what was your childhood kind of like?
Well, I can vaguely remember living in Guide Rock. I was only 3 years old when we moved to Hastings, but living in Guide Rock, I kind of remember the house, and my mom worked at the hotel that was in Guide Rock at the time with my grandma. They ran the hotel. My dad worked building the diversion dam and then worked for the railroad. Daddy did a lot of fishing and hunting, and I don't know, I can just remember spending a lot of time with Mom and Dad and my sister Judy. And the one thing I remember most about Guide Rock is the lady that lived next door to us. She was an elderly lady, and she had really, really long gray hair, and she had no family, and my folks kind of took her in, and Mom was always, when was fixing supper or dinner, she'd always have leftovers, and I called her Nanny. And she would take food over to Nanny. And I remember Nanny raised Angora rabbits. And one year she she sheared the rabbits and sent the fur to some company and had material made. And my mother was a wonderful seamstress, and she did all of sewing for my sister and I. And she made a jumper for me out of that material that was from the rabbit's fur, and it was a real pretty blue. And I just remember that so vividly.
Yeah.
That jumper. Wished I would have saved it, but of course I didn't. But we had a good childhood, and I remember moving to Hastings then, and we were all excited about the great big old house that Mom and Dad bought and fixed up. Daddy was always fixing on the house. So, but lots of fun with my sister. There was 7 years difference in our ages, but we had a lot of fun together.
And
anyway.
it was just you and your sister?
Just Judy
no
and
siblings?
I. No, no other siblings.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what were you doing prior to your awareness of the war? What was your life like before you had any knowledge of it?
Well, I would have been in school. I went to St. Cecilia's School, and in those days, I mean, you walked to school, and we lived quite a distance from school, but we walked rain or shine or snow, or once in a while maybe the neighbor lady would take us to school. But at that time there weren't activities like there are today in school, but I remember being in the pep club, and we didn't have girls' sports like they do now, but I guess our activities were slumber parties on the weekends. We had a lot of fun at slumber parties. And I can remember when Judy started to drive, Mom taught her to drive, and I remember the very first time we went out, I sat in the back seat, and Mom was teaching Judy to drive, and she drove off in a ditch, and we had to have a tractor pull us out. So that was a lot of fun. I remember being so scared.
Yeah. And then how old would you have been when you did find out about the Vietnam War?
Well, I would have had to been, I don't know, maybe 14 or 15 years old. I would have been in high school.
Yeah.
I'm sure we talked about it in history class or whatever. But, you know, you didn't have the media coverage that you have now, so you didn't hear a lot about it. I mean, you might read something in the paper, and of course, I wasn't into reading the newspaper then, but I guess all you really heard about it was what you heard at school and very little bit in the news. So I guess that's where I heard most of it, was at school.
Okay, and so when you were learning about the war, can you remember any of the thoughts kind of going on through your mind when you had kind of figured out what was going on?
Well, I think everybody, you know, it was always across the water, so and I'm sure there was some worry, but I don't know, maybe I was just a teenager that just wasn't paying much attention at the time.
Yeah.
Probably.
And once you did get a little bit older and kind of maybe started paying more attention to it and having it more affect you personally, what were some of your biggest concerns?
Well, first of all, Grandpa and I were dating, and I graduated in 1965 in May, and then Grandpa got a draft notice in July. And that's really when all of these things started going through your mind is, okay, my fiance just got drafted, and how is this going to affect him? Well, the both of us, because we had set a September wedding date, and now here he's going off to Fort Leonard Wood to boot camp. Mm-hmm. So it was all unknown. You just really didn't know. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, after that, once Grandpa got through boot camp, we did get married in September. Actually, we were supposed to get married August 21st, and that didn't work out because he was in Fort Leonard Wood. Mm-hmm. So then we got married September 25th, and I can just remember going to pick him up on a Friday, and the rehearsals was on Friday night, and we were married the next day. Mm. And thank heavens he made it home. Yeah. I mean, I just figured that's the way it was going to happen, not knowing how Uncle Sam really works.
Yeah.
And luckily it did happen that way. But yeah, we were married in September, and by December he was on a ship headed towards South Korea.
Okay.
And thank heavens it wasn't Vietnam.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then, like you were talking about kind of the unknown and how much there was stuff that you didn't know what was going on. What were some of your thoughts about the presidents at that time? There was, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford.
I think Johnson probably was the biggest, the president that maybe, I mean, in my mind, there was more controversy about President Johnson because every day, and like I said, you didn't have the media coverage that you have now, but every day you would hear of the soldiers that were being killed and the bodies that were coming home, but yet all of the politicians saying, we are not at war. Well, how can you be having all of these bodies coming home and you're not at war?
Yeah. Was there any president that you felt like handled it correctly or maybe did a little bit better job than the other ones?
I really don't. I really couldn't tell you. I really don't know.
Yeah. And then...
They should have let the military take care of it and stayed out of it.
Yeah, the military should have been... The politicians were just in it for their own gain, and the military commanders should have been able to handle that war, to get in there and fight the war and to bring our people home, to bring our men and women home. But they were not allowed to do that, and that's why it went on for so many years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just for those listening to this right now, the man that talked is my grandpa, Jim Gerloff, my grandma's husband. So in case he talks again, just so you're aware of who that is. And then what was your understanding of why we were even involved in this war? You did mention how you did think it was kind of a mistake. Why do you think that we even got involved in it in the first place?
I don't know. I don't know why we got involved in it. I don't know.
That seems to be an answer a lot of people give.
I just don't know why we got involved in it. We had so many lives that were taken, and we didn't gain. What did we gain? I don't think we gained anything.
Mm-hmm. And then moving on, so you talked about how when Grandpa was drafted, you guys were already engaged at that time, and then when you got married. And when I talked to Grandpa about it, he had mentioned how he went and talked to, who did you go and talk to about your draft notice?
The draft board.
The draft board, and how he had said that he was supposed to be getting married. And they said, well, hurry up and get married because we're not going to take married men. But he still felt like he had that duty to go. And how did you feel about that?
Well, Grandpa had very strong feelings about he wasn't going to be a draft dodger. A lot of guys did that. And he just felt that it was his duty. He had a wife now and soon to have a family, and he just felt like he owed that to his country, to serve his country and to protect the United States.
Mm-hmm. And then at the time that Grandpa had got drafted and went off to Korea, which is where he was stationed, what were you doing for work at this time? Were you working, or
Yes.
What was kind of going on in your life?
I was working at the telephone company. I was switchboard operator at Lincoln Telephone and Telegraph.
Okay. And this is when you were married? Like right after you were...
Yes. I started working at the phone company when I was still in high school, and I just kept that job. And in December, just before Grandpa left for Korea, I found out that I was pregnant. And so I lived with Mom and Dad and worked at the phone company. And then Becky was born in July. So she was 9.5 months old when Jim the first time he got to see her.
Okay. And so how long was it from Grandpa being drafted to when you had found out you were, or when he had left for Korea, than when you found out you were actually pregnant? How long was
I
that?
found out just before he left in December.
Okay. And so did he know before he had left, or did you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We met one weekend in St. Louis, and one of the guys that he was in boot camp with lived in St. Louis. Jim Bauer lived in St. Louis. So I flew to St. Louis and met him there, and then I think it was probably just the weekend.
72-hour pass.
Okay. And then at that time, I knew that I was pregnant.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then it was just, oh gosh, I'm not sure that it was maybe a week or two later that he left for Korea.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that same time that Grandpa was leaving for Korea, were there many people that you knew that were going and being drafted?
Well, yeah, some of Grandpa's friends, there were several that had been drafted at the same time. But Grandpa was the one that was married and couldn't take a family to Korea, of course. But he had friends that went to Germany and Alaska, where families could go then. But I, of course, wasn't able to go to Korea.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so then will you kind of describe the atmosphere of what the people were feeling at this time once all of the men were leaving?
Well, the military men were the ones that were blamed for the war. They were the ones that were fighting the war. So consequently, the respect you see for the military people now, you never did see in the 60s. It was awful the way the military men were treated. And now you see a military man and you show him nothing but respect. And at that time you didn't, because they were the ones that were killing all these people in Vietnam, when they were told this is what they were going to do, this is the war they were going to fight.
Like, they didn't really have a choice.
They didn't have no, they didn't have a choice. But they were the ones that were being blamed for it. And that was hard to take. That was very hard to take.
Yeah. And did you see any of that kind of hatred towards you because you were married to a military man, or was it not really like that?
No, I didn't see that. At the time that I was pregnant with Becky, instead of I did go to a regular OBGYN doctor in Hastings. Well, in order to get the military benefit of that, I had to go out to what was the Naval Depot now, which is now Central Community College. And that's where I would see a doctor, the same doctor that I would have seen in Hastings. And I can remember the big waiting rooms and how cold they were. It's just like they didn't have the heat on, you know. It's just that I can just vividly remember that, the cold waiting rooms. And I remember Dr. McMillan saying to me, you know, you need to come to my office in Hastings. And so I don't know that it was any exception that he made for me, but that's just the kind of doctor he was at the time. So I was able to do that. But as far as
he did the paperwork, and the military didn't know what building you were in, so
yeah,
he just felt it was better for you.
Yeah, he felt it was better for me.
It didn't change the benefit any.
No, it didn't change the benefit. I mean, the military still paid for Becky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also you had mentioned how while you were pregnant with Becky, which is my mother, for also the people that are listening, what other kind of help did you have other than living with your parents? Did they pretty much just help you out through that time? Were you living with them that entire time?
Yes, I lived with them the entire time until Grandpa came home. I couldn't have made it on my own. I mean, I was making $123 a month and 10 cents. And Grandpa, because I was making that much money, he made much less than that.
$34.
Yeah, $34 a month Grandpa was making.
And why since you were making that, did he make less?
Well, because I was getting his benefit. And of course, I suppose they figured, well, his food's supplied, his housing is supplied, all of that type of stuff. So he basically was getting nothing. But then in 1965, that probably, I mean, the $123 I got was probably pretty good money at that time. I was working, but I don't remember how much I was making or anything. But I wouldn't have been able to make it on my own had it not been for Grandma and Grandpa. Mm-hmm. And I know that Jim, that your grandpa, wanted me to be with them. I mean, it was just security for him, knowing that that Becky and I were being taken care of. And then, of course, Grandma and Grandpa Gerloff, they were right in Hastings, so we were able to see them, and they were able to come and see us, and the same way with my sister and family, and Grandpa's sisters and family.
Well, that security you're talking about is part of the reason I stayed in Korea.
Yeah. And then Grandpa stayed in Korea. He extended his time in Korea because we knew that he was going to have to go to Washington State. So if he would extend, then he would get out just a couple months early. And as it was, if he had gone to Washington, he would have ended up in Vietnam. So,
well, that 2 months was my time, because I never did take furlough.
Yeah, that's right. Grandpa never did take any furlough time to come home or anything. Yeah.
And then when did you find out that Grandpa was coming back home? Did you know when he had went to Washington at what point he was going to come home?
Oh, gosh, I don't remember when I found out you were coming home. I guess it was after. Of course, I didn't know Grandpa had extended that time. All I knew is he wasn't coming home as soon as he had thought. But, I mean, now, after the fact, I understood why he did what he did as far as extending that time. But I just don't remember at what point I did know that you were coming home in April. I don't remember how.
Well, it had to be sometime because I was supposed to come home a year after I went there, which was in December. But I extended for them extra months. And at that time, I had 2 month pearl time come. Well, that was my time. Mm-hmm. And if I'd have came back and went to Seattle, they'd have had to let me out 2 months early anyway. So I'd had to come back to the States and go to Washington for like 5 months, and they'd had to let me out. Well, that wasn't really enough time to re-station me somewhere. So they said, well, if you do extend here, when you get out, you just go home. So that's what I did.
Yeah. And it would have been the worst time of the year. I mean, from the first part of the year until March, and bad weather. We didn't have a dependable car. So as it was, it worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Becky was a baby.
Yeah, Becky was a baby, and we didn't know where we'd live. So with family here, it just worked out better that way.
Okay. And besides having Grandpa back home, which would obviously be causing changes in your current life, or in your current life at that time, what were some changes that happened when he came back? So obviously your living arrangements may have changed, or anything like that would have changed.
Well, I think probably, the one thing, I know you didn't ask me this, but the one thing that really worried me was that Becky would be afraid of him, because Grandpa was really the only man in her life. So I can remember getting pictures of Grandpa and setting them by her when she was a baby so she would recognize him. But I remember him getting off of that plane in Omaha And Becky was afraid of him. And I can remember being in the back seat coming home, and she didn't want to go to him, but it didn't take long before she knew, I mean, she was only 9 months old when he got home, but it didn't take long. So anyway, yeah, as far as changes, I think we stayed with Mom and Dad 2 or 3 days. Grandpa went to work right away. We got an apartment and were able to start our life together then. Mm-hmm. So we had a real nice 2-bedroom apartment, and we thought we're rolling in the dough because Grandpa came home with $1,200, and we went to Earling's and bought furniture.
Spent it in one day.
Yeah, we spent it in one day, which was stupid. Hindsight is always 20/20.
Yeah.
But
and then we talked a little bit about what your kind of responsibilities were with being pregnant and having to raise my mom practically alone, but with your parents' help.
Uh-huh.
How did your responsibilities change when Grandpa had come back?
Well, then really, it was just like starting out our married life, only we had a 9-month-old baby. Mm-hmm. So now I'm taking care of a household. I'm cooking, which Grandma was always there to do. Not that I didn't help her.
Easy on the cooking.
Well, yeah. Well, cooking was, yeah. We won't exactly call it cooking because I remember some of the first meals that I made too. But I didn't work anymore. I quit my job. Grandpa wanted me to quit so I could be at home and take care of Becky.
And where was Grandpa working?
Well, he worked on the railroad for 3 days, and that didn't work out. So then Grandpa went to Hastings Utilities and worked there.
For 7 days.
Yeah, and I think he was making $2.10 an hour.
So you worked at the utilities place for 7 days, you said? And then what were you doing?
Then he went to Juniata Co-op and drove a propane truck, and I don't remember how long you were there.
A little less than a year.
Yeah, but then in 1967, Grandpa went to work at Southern Power District in May and was there for almost 40 years then. Mm-hmm. But, and then in the meantime, well, actually, we rented a house on 4th Avenue, and while Grandpa was in Ashland, Nebraska at camp, he was obligated to go back to camp, and so he was in Ashland for a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And I didn't remember this, but evidently Michelle went with us to either pick him up or take him there. She was talking about that the other day. And anyway, the house across the street came up for sale. And of course, this was all before cell phones. I mean, we had no contact with each other whatsoever when Grandpa was in Korea. Mm-hmm. I wrote him a letter every day, and he might get, it would probably take a couple weeks to get there, and sometimes he might get 10 or 15 letters at one time, mm-hmm. and pictures in it every day. But anyway, the house across the street came up for sale, and then when Grandpa got home, he applied for a GI loan, and we bought that house on 4th Avenue. So that's just kind of
that you did live in when I was a little girl that I saw.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Okay. And then how long would you have been in that house before you moved up here to Guide Rock?
Oh gosh. Well, we bought that house in 1968, and we moved here in 2005.
Okay.
So we lived there a lot of years. A lot of years.
Yeah. And so then over time, has your views changed on war in general because of this war, or has it overall just kind of stayed steady?
Well, I think that, I think as an adult, you're much more aware of things like that than when you're a young teenager. And of course, you hear so much more now than what you did from the media. And I'm not always sure the media should share things like they do. I think there's a lot of times they should leave out some of these things. But I just know that these politicians need to listen more to the military, the experts, when it comes to military intervention in a war. And I'm not sure that happens either all the time.
So then if you could tell me about a specific experience from the Vietnam era that you just can't forget or you wouldn't ever forget, just maybe a specific memory.
Well, I think probably the biggest thing was the day that Becky was born. She was 2 days old before Grandpa even found out about her. And there again, it's just the era that we lived in with no cell phones, no Facebook. You didn't FaceTime. You didn't know what FaceTime was. It wasn't even there then. But I guess maybe that's kind of a selfish thing on my part. But with me, it was just the fact that Grandpa was not able to be here when Becky was born. And to this day, that is just something that is special to Becky and her dad. Every 4th of July.
Which is her birthday.
Which is her birthday, and Grandpa's is the 2nd of July. And that's just something that on the 4th of July, they just kind of have to have their own little time together to think about that. And like I said, maybe it's selfish on my part, but that probably was the heart. Yes, it was the war and it was the killing that was going on and that type of thing. But personally, it was just the fact that Grandpa wasn't here and he lost 9.5 months of her life. That here we are, how many years later, 50 years later, and it still affects him.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. And then, so you said that Grandpa didn't even know that she was born until 2 days after her birth. So how did he find out that she had been born?
Well, Grandma went to the Red Cross because that was your line of communication at that time. And of course, it was the 4th of July. So she couldn't contact the Red Cross on the 4th of July. And I didn't know this until a few days later. So on the 5th of July, Grandma called the Red Cross right away. And then, of course, it was another day later then before Grandpa found out.
And they contacted him?
They contacted him. Grandpa was out in the field. So I think that was another delay right there, was the fact that he was out in the field. He wasn't at the camp. Okay. Yeah, in Wee John Boo. So, like I said, it was just, that was the line of communications that you used at that time.
Yeah. And then what lessons did you learn from the Vietnam War that you would want others to remember about this time? What's maybe one significant thing about this war that you think is important for others to know?
Well, I think it's the fact that we shouldn't have been there in the first place. That there was no, sometimes the United States just sticks their nose into places where they have no business in doing. And that these politicians, again, need to listen to the military experts. But I don't think we ever should have been in Vietnam and lost all the thousands and thousands of lives. Anybody that goes to the Vietnam Memorial should really make them stop and think about all the lives that were lost.
Mm-hmm. And have you been there?
Well, actually, a number of years ago, there was a replica of the Vietnam Memorial in Superior, Nebraska. And even though it was a replica, it was very heart-wrenching. Mm-hmm. Grandpa had known a guy his age, and we found his name on the wall. And Rich Kulwicki. And was there another one that we found?
Well,
A couple different ones.
Jim Hall.
Yeah.
That was married to Penny Cruz.
Oh, yeah.
I went to school.
And so this replica was at the park in Superior, Nebraska. And they had people there that, I don't know if they were from like the American Legion or VFW or where they were from, that would go around and talk to people.
That lady traveled with it.
Oh, she traveled. That's right. She traveled with this. And, I mean, it wasn't the thing that was in Washington, D.C., but, boy, I'll tell you, it really got to a person to see that. And all those names on the wall. Yeah.
Mm. And then, can you remember when you had gotten knowledge that the war had ended?
I don't know that I do remember that.
I know.
I don't. Huh?
I can't give you a date.
Yeah.
But it's when they run everybody out of Hanoi.
Yeah, everyone was out of Hanoi, but I can't say that I do remember it.
Okay. And then once things after the war was all settled down and it was all over and said and done, did life return back to normal, or were there things that were kind of permanently changed by the war?
Well, I guess I really don't know at what point the military gained more recognition and more respect, but and I'm not sure that the Vietnam War is what changed it, but I think probably that's
I think
something that changed.
Turnaround as far as the American people realizing what the military is and what it does, what it stands for, was 9/11.
Well, that's true. After 9/11, yeah. But as far as the Vietnam War, I don't know, Jenna.
Mm-hmm. And then if you could choose one word to describe the Vietnam War, what would it be?
A big mistake.
Okay.
It's 2 words, but it was
okay.
A big mistake.
You know what my answer was?
What? Oh.
Mistake.
Mistake. Yeah. Okay. And then can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? You did talk about it earlier.
Well, I just think that we should never have gone there. We should have listened to the military people on how that war should have been fought, and that's not the way it was. The politicians wanted the war fought in a certain way, and whatever the military gained one night, they'd lose and go back and fight it again the next day. They just fought the same areas over and over and over again and just continued to lose lives.
And do you think that there's anything specific that we could have done differently to make this war go a different direction?
Well, yeah, I think if the war would have been allowed, if they would have been allowed to fight the war and get out of it.
Allowed to win.
Allowed to win, yeah. And they could have won it. I don't know why they didn't choose to do so.
Okay. And then can you kind of elaborate on that part where you feel that they could have won it?
Well, I think if they would have allowed and I'm not, I don't know that much about the military, but I think if they would have, they could have fought it in a different way. They sent these men in to fight it, and they probably could have done more good with aircraft, but they just weren't allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm. And then is there anything else that you want to add?
Oh, I think probably that war just changed so many lives, and there was just so much death and destruction, and I can't help but feel like, I know we've opened up our borders to the Asians, and and it's not that I'm against that, but it just is hard to forget all of those lives that were taken, and it's just hard to forget all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, well, I guess that kind of concludes our interview. Thank you very much for meeting with me today.
You're very welcome.